we'll get an email or a message on Instagram from somebody, hey, so-and-so talked about this and you didn't give them credit. It's like, we're not watching every YouTube Spec show and every Instagram account. I would love to have that ability to collect all that information so that we could cite.
Swaggle You don't mention Swaggle ever.
Swaggle who?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swaggle. And today I am very excited because I have a very special video for you guys here today. I was actually able to sit down with Nick from Key Collector Comic Books and have a lengthy discussion about Key Collector as an app and what it means to the community. Now, I know a lot of people out in the comic book community have very strong opinions about the app. Perhaps you love the app and use it every day, or maybe there are those people who think that the app is actually ruining the hobby. And I wanted to have a discussion with Nick to see if we can address some of those topics so we can have more transparency in the community at large. So I hope you guys really enjoy this conversation. It's a very, very lengthy one. I will try to put timestamps so that you guys can navigate to the parts you might be more interested in. But grab a stack of comics that need some new bags and boards, sit back, relax, listen, and I hope you guys enjoy the discussion. All right, well, I'm with Nick from Key Collector app. Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the channel.
No problem. Hello, everybody. Am I calling you Swaggle or Mickey, or what am I calling you?
You can call me either. I guess whatever kind of rolls off the tongue,
all
easier
right.
For you. But you can call me Swag. You can call me Swaggle, Swaggle Haas. Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Well, again, Nick, thanks for hopping on the channel with me here today. And you know, I'm really looking forward to talking to you about, you know, the comic community and collecting and specifically, obviously, Key Collector app, which is, you know, kind of the thing that, you know, I'm sure a lot of people are going to know you for. But before we really get into that, I did kind of want to just ask, like, you know, maybe you can introduce yourself to the people who don't know you and maybe talk a little bit about, you know, your background, maybe how you got into comic book collecting and
Sure.
What led you to this journey that is, you know, you creating this app in the market.
It's like my favorite topic is Key Collector.
Yeah.
Where do we start? It sounds like you want me to go to the very beginning. It's like
what was
interview
the first
with a
comic?
Vampire.
Yeah, lay on the
couch.
An
interview with a vampire or interview with a vampire? Because that's always like I think there's always a misconception there. And
I feel like that's a Berenstein Bear.
Oh,
situation.
Totally right.
Yeah.
So I started collecting right around the Batman movie, the first one. Which is 1989, and I was just a lad. I think I had just started reading, and I was really into the commercial. You know, the movie, I don't even think I had seen it yet, but I was like, this is speaking to me on a level like nothing had ever spoken to me before. So
right.
I wanted more of it. You know, eventually saw the movie, but I wanted, like, okay, that was great, but come on, I need more of this. So I think the first Batman comic I even read was like The Dark Knight Returns, which is like, you know, I'm a little kid, you know,
yeah,
like
the movie tie-in comic. Yeah.
Oh, The Dark Knight Returns. It's like, you know, Frank Miller is it's a pretty heavy Batman story. I mean, it's fairly violent. It's pretty text heavy, but whatever. I mean, anything, you know what it's like when you're a kid, especially back then, where it's not like you had everything at your fingertips and everything was like meant to extract the maximum interest level out of your little brain. It was a different time. I mean, now it's like you have all these TV shows, you have all these movies, you have comics everywhere. You can get them online for free if you want. It's like a golden age of nerdom. But back then it was like a Nintendo game of the X-Men. Oh my God, I have to get this. And then you play it and you're like, oh, I want to like this, but it sucks. Anyway, so just getting into that, I remember, you know, going to the dollar store, buying like a stack of, you know, Batman and the Outsiders, which then turned into like All-Star Squadron and all these like it was a lot of DC back then, and which, you know, then transitioned as the years went on to like getting into, of course, Spider-Man, and then getting into Vertigo, and, you know, that for people who were around during the Vertigo years, during the height of the Vertigo years, with like, I mean, my favorites were like Fables and Lucifer, and then you had, of course, Sandman, all of just like the limited series Vertigo is just a total game changer, like Dark
Right.
Horse in a sense, but like sort of the next level of like mature themed, or I guess adult, more less superhero type comics. And then
Right.
like you said, in and out, don't have the money for it now. Okay, getting back into it now that I got like my first real job. And then while I was working for a liquor company, I worked for a liquor company for like 20 years, or like 15 years actually. And I was driving a lot, and I would stop at like antique stores and hit up their book section, find out, see if they had comic books. Basically anywhere that I was driving, I was looking for a place that might sell comics, used bookstore or whatever. So I found this one used bookstore this guy owned, and this is when I was living in Milwaukee. I'm in Chicago now, but and he didn't really know what he had. I remember the first time I walked in, I'm like, oh, look at this, Mr. Sinister, first appearance for $1.
Nice.
What's going on here? Like, it's in great condition. And like, what else you got? And he said, well, I got this warehouse where I have like 100,000 comics. And I'm like, this is the moment. Oh my God. We all, as comic book collectors, want to like find that Shangri-La, that
Yeah.
untouched collection that we can just sort of dive in like Uncle Scrooge, in his money silo, and just like
Right.
swim around in it. But eventually, you know, he was, like I said, a bookstore seller, and I'm like, hey, let me help you out. I'll pick out the key issues, the books that you would want to sell, and as payment, like I will work for comics. Like, let me keep what I put aside. So we ended up doing this deal, and it turned out like I thought I knew a lot, and I realized, after like a month in the catacombs of like this warehouse basement, I'm like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm looking at here. What is
Right.
this? There was
Right.
so much, over decades. Comics, we're talking about the mid 30s when comics in their modern or standard format were introduced, and all of these comic books that have been published since then, it's almost impossible to really hone in on what I was interested in, which was key issues, not to resell, but just to build my collection. There's something about the historical aspect about comic books as a pop culture phenomenon that had always sparked my interest. So
Mm.
going through all this massive collection and just having this sort of wish, like, I wish that something like what would be Key Collector
Right.
existed. And looking around, I'm like, why does this not exist? And why are these people, when I'm googling this type of functioning resource, then people seem to be interested in it? Why is it like not? What the hell? So then this voice is like, well, maybe you should do it. And I'm like, what? No, come on. And then eventually, it convinced me. And here we are, I guess. There's a
Right.
little bit more to it than that, but
Sure. So that's really interesting. So you get this kind of light bulb moment where it's like you have this experience where it's
yeah.
like, man, like I just there's this thing that I need as a collector and it doesn't exist. And then flash forward, you create this app that is now known to be a key collector. And I guess this is a really interesting thing and something I've been thinking about a lot in our conversation today. Of just like I wanted to ask you what sounds like a simple question, but almost feels like it is a really important thing to understand. But the question I want to ask you is simply, what is Key Collector?
Oh,
You
man,
know,
that is,
is is Key Collector a database? Is it a news breaking like blog? Is it a resource? Like how would you sort of define what Key Collector is in the space?
that's a good question. And it's a question that's not too easily answerable, because I've tried to sort of sum it up in, like, let's call it an elevator pitch, where
Mhm.
it's like, okay, what is the distilled singular definition of key collector? And there are people who are able to explain it better than myself, oddly enough. But and that's actually also a process that I'm currently in right now with a company that I just hired to sort of help me define what it is in terms of concept. Not that, actually, concept might be the wrong wording, but just I guess how to present it. Because
Yeah.
when I launched the app in October 2017, it was like, let's see how this goes. It wasn't like I had a marketing plan. It was like
Right.
all of this is so new to me. Basically just brought like my liquor promotion experience along, like hired, promotional girls to dress up as superheroes and hand out flyers at the New York Comic Con. It was like,
Right.
I'm like, I don't know what else to do. But, going into the social media space and the comic book space in general was like, I didn't have control of the message of what Key Collector was. So anybody that would say, "Oh, it's a Spec app, it's a this or that, it's this," and it's like, well, there wasn't much that I could do to sort of reintroduce it in a different context because it's not like I had a plan. So
Right.
it sort of is whatever it is to whoever is using it, whether that is
Mm.
a speculation tool, whether that's something to just keep up on what's happening in movies and TV. Or just, something to go to the dollar bins with, or something to, we have reading orders. So, we try to appeal to as many different types of collectors as possible while remaining true to the concept. And the concept from the beginning in what I wanted was a resource that identifies comic books, key issues that explain the history of comics and characters in the universes that they exist in. So to me, it was always sort of like a historical record of comic books. Like you could
Right.
look up a character and you could kind of understand what the character's development history was by its key issues. So it's like, okay, first appearance, second appearance, then you have an origin story and what is important about the origin. Then you have a first appearance of a supporting character that's important to the character, like Mary Jane Watson. And then you have a death of a character that also was very important to that development of that, because there's just so much and there's so many things. Like my favorite, is looking at some of the really deep dive Wolverine key issues that I don't know if you could even really, maybe a lot of people wouldn't call them key issues, but maybe the, description of it is not so cemented in Marvel's history, like
Right.
recognizable history. Like, where did the name Wolverine come from? Well, it was given to him by Native Americans, and that's
Mm.
something that's like, it's not really well known. It happened in that stretch of issues that was Marvel Comics Presents, that Barry Windsor Smith run where he did Weapon X. And then it's like, it also gives a history to the, his yellow and dark blue or black costume that he was, in his introduction. So it's things like that, these little nuanced things that aren't hard hitting enough to make it to like a price guide or on the CGC label that, you want to sort of develop so that people understand the character, but not so broad that, we are cataloging every character no matter who or what they are. Like there are criteria that we have developed, a framework or what could be considered like a constriction to the database becoming too bloated with characters that may have appeared once or twice or only 5 times.
It's really interesting just kind of hearing you talk about it because like kind of goes back to even what you said too, where key collector sort of means different things to different people depending on
Right.
how they see it. And I think that maybe that might be where some people may love it or some people may have issues with it because if they see it needing to be a certain thing and then it's not that, then they're having an issue with that versus other people who really really enjoy it. And so I did in talking to you, I want to eventually talk a little bit about like
Sure. Yeah.
some of the issues that people have with stuff. But before I kind of get into that part, I did kind of want to ask, and this is sort of going off of what you were where you were just talking about. But like, did you ever imagine that the app from starting in 2017 would be what it is today? And did you ever imagine that it would sort of have such influence in the comic collecting community?
No, that wasn't necessarily even the purpose or drive or directive at any point. It's not like, in concepting this, which wasn't even like really, a thought out process or anything, but, never was the intention to be influential. Just really, the goal was to look. I'm sure we can all identify with going into like a half price books or whatever comic book store that has a dollar bin and going through, and like you go through and you spend like 10 minutes on it and you're Googling stuff, and then you got like a headache, and and
Right.
then you move on to the next box, and then some guy like saunters in and he's really like confident looking, and he flips through really quick and pulls out like three things, and you're like, what did you just pull out of there that I missed? Like what did you just get that I just looked passed over? So feeling like you're sort of at a deficit was a big aspect of, creating this, and
Right.
wanting to, and also the speediness of going through some of this inventory is like, it could kind of kill it. It could kind of kill the hobby for a lot of people. For me,
Right.
it was an irritating thing to just like constantly have to be Googling something or whatever. But never was it like, oh, uh the push notifications of, news and stuff like that. Wasn't a part of it. It just, so there were a lot of things that evolved based on feedback that we got. Like
Right.
when I launched, it was, a far different looking thing than it is today. And a lot of what it's become. So when I launched, it was like, okay, this is the app that I want. This is what, is satisfactory to me as a collector. And then it's, I mean, I remember when I set it up so that people can submit keys or issues that, hey, make an argument about why this should be in the database. And there were things that I just did not expect. There were things but it made sense for what it is that this was in a very broad sense.
Right.
And so, I mean, look, when launched, it was like, I think there were 7,500 comic books in the database, and now there's over 30,000. So it
Yeah.
was like, and not everything is visible because, we'll do keys this week, and there's stuff where maybe we don't know what's going to happen in the issue, or there's something that, like indie books, for example. Like I pretty much put every number one independent book launch in the app, but it's not going to be visible unless you have it saved to your owned or wanted, because it's just too much. If you're trying to, browse or whatever, it's just too much.
Yeah.
So there's a category, Indies 2021 or 2022, that people can go to and see every indie book that was visible in the main search, because it's still visible in the categories. But so the point I'm trying to make is, yeah, well, we have over, 30,000 issues in the database now, all individually entered, hand curated. That's like a big thing is hand curation. It's everything is individually researched and entered within the framework, which by the way could be seen on the website, frequently asked questions on
Yeah.
keycollectorcomics.com, just so if
Well,
anybody has curiosity what that
well,
is.
maybe we can talk about that a little bit because I am curious and in terms of like even just this idea of like key comic book and like how you define a key comic book. And on the
Right.
one hand, I actually I love that, in ways you mentioned like coming up with the name of Wolverine. Like there was nowhere you were going to be able to find out that type of information. And I love that those a book that might exist that establishes that can now be recognized. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's like $1,000 book. It just means that like here's a book that's recognized and this has a little special place in the history and we can call it a key. But how does key collector sort of figure out what keys are? Because I think that there may be those in the community that feel like, I mean, do we really need to say that Wolverine's cousin's brother's former roommate's, stepmom is, a key comic book. I'm not saying that you do that, but you get my hyperbole of like what I'm getting at here, where it's like, what is that criteria, and how do you define keys, and how do you just distinguish even new keys of the week, like what fits the bill to get promoted in that sense?
Well, it's, a lot of it is standard first appearance. Like a first appearance, if it's a new character, um, and it's not like a secretary or like it's a character of that could have some ongoing potential. We'll
Right.
add that. Well, that'll get added, but
Right.
it has to, there has to be some kind of uh, future that the character has in store. Like there has to be, because I mean, look at a DC comic book, like something in Action Comics where they'll have like 18 aliens that they'll introduce per
Right.
issue, or something is killing the children where they might introduce like Ken or like Frankie. And
Right.
it's like we
Right.
can't. I mean, nobody's really looking for these types of characters. And if there was a overwhelming um, communication coming from people that use the app, then that would be something that we would, pivot in order to serve that part of the community, which is the most important thing that we can do.
Right.
But as far as keys go, if it's like a modern book, a $3 or $4 that had a $3 or $4 cover price, then it would be like an $8 minimum to get added as a back issue. So it would have to resell consistently for $8, ungraded, to be on eBay, to be added as a back issue. As far as like something from the Bronze Age or Copper Age or even Silver Age, yeah, like a lot of these issues you can't find for under $20 or $50 or $100. But does it sell for an amount? Does it resell? If it's not a key issue where it introduces a character of an A or B or maybe even C level, and usually, my whole framework on it is like, does the character appear in at least 15 times? If the
Mm.
character appears at least 15 times, then chances are they are historically relevant to whatever title or whatever publisher.
Right.
So that's, an important thing. But for a Copper or Bronze Age book or Silver, it could be an iconic cover. It could be an artist that's in demand. So if the issue resells consistently for higher than other issues that are published in the same time frame, then there's likely a reason for it that we can identify, and that's when it'll be added. I mean, very
Right.
rarely is something. I mean, there's so many things, especially when you go back like 30 years, where it's like World War II covers, um, even some of the racier covers are, whatever. I mean, there's tons of like subcategories, but there's usually, if there's something that's selling for more than other issues published during that same time frame, there's usually a good reason for it. If something is selling for higher in that time frame, and there's no reason that we can discern, hey, why would this be? Is there an error? Is there a smaller circulation of this book or whatever? Then it's probably not going to get entered, because one of my main things is always, um, what's going on here? Is this legitimate? Can I verify this? Is somebody trying to push like the price up on this? Like that's always something that is considered. And if something
Right.
doesn't make sense, and it just doesn't get entered
So kind of what
until it
I'm
does.
so so to kind of reiterate, what I'm hearing is it's like, okay, there's clearly, timeless first appearance of books that we all know are keys. It's going to be AF-15 is the first Spider-Man, and clearly that's going in the app, things like that. And then you have other things that, depending on how the community reacts or the market reacts, that might be why a book is added as a key. And there's some curation aspect between like you and your team and how you guys define like what books move and stuff. Or
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is, like I said, it's on our frequently asked questions, which will be expanded and I think just delved into further. But you know, it's turned more into like, instead of just first appearances and second appearances and origins and stuff like that, it's also, you know, low print runs that have value, that are in
Hmm.
demand, popular runs like, Silver Surfer, the 1969 series is, some of the later issues are worth a lot, even though nothing really happens in it. It's something that people like to complete that run because it's a short run.
Right.
Uh, I, I mean,
So
even today, like Spawn. I mean, Spawn. It's not like every issue is going to go in that comes out, but you can definitely look and see. Okay, there were 13,000 issues estimated by Comicron. So that, yeah, this issue is going to be harder to find just by the nature of there being X amount of people who want to collect the full run of Spawn.
let me ask this in terms of like, I guess, specifics. And this is kind of like an interesting question too, of like, what comes first? Does a book get hot, or does an influencer talk about a book, or does a book get reported on and then it becomes hot? I guess, what is that kind of push and pull on your guys' end? Like, how do you think about that? Or do you kind of just feel like, well, the market is the market and they're going to react however they react? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I guess it's. I think that there's a misconception that we are a lot more um, influential, like that we attempt to be influential, because that's not really necessarily what we do. What we
Hmm.
do is we communicate news. So that's one aspect of what we do. So whether it's a push notification or whether it's like, hey, here's a rumor that's going around, that's not coming from us. It's either coming from uh, scoopers or an insight source or Deadline or some news reporting agency that's, I mean, so we're getting the news out to people quickly as it happens, and sometimes before it happens, when we have a trusted insight source come through, which,
Hmm.
when I say trusted, it's like somebody we know. Um, but it's not really, and maybe you could give an example, but we're not really doing like, hey, this is a key issue because we said so. In a sense, it's like there's a legitimacy to the issue, whether it's like, okay, it's a first appearance of a new character. Well, yeah, it's a key issue. I mean, it is a key issue. It is a first meeting of two characters. Okay, so that's something that's kind of emerged that maybe is less, that ranks a little lower or has a lower weight in terms of being a key issue. But
Right.
putting identifying something, putting the information out there, is just doing that, and wherever it goes from there is has I mean, if people are interested in it, then they buy it. To what degree they're interested in it is kind of out of our hands.
Yeah, and I think I'm just trying to think from the where people might see it is
Totally valid question. I
if
mean, it's
the
a valid
app if
question.
yeah, if the app is highlighting books in the market that once weren't, say, known. People, I think, sometimes think key collector does a thing and then people react. But from your perspective, what I find is like, I feel like you're looking at the market and then posting things. Does
Oh
that
yeah, I
feel
mean,
accurate?
absolutely. If we're talking about the trending 20, which kind of sounds like what you're talking about, I mean, that is like a quantified list. I mean, we're looking at what sold last week from Friday to Thursday to what sold the following week, or the week that we're in, from Friday to Thursday. So it's like this already occurred.
Hmm.
All this, once we report on it, let's say, it already occurred. So, and I think that's, the most transparent. Like, a lot of the things that we do are as transparent as could possibly be.
Yeah.
I mean, everything about, okay, so that's one of the most important things, if not the most important thing about Key Collector, is transparency and
Sure.
trust, because we have eBay links where we make a percentage on, and that is something that is known because it's in almost every header description, and it's something that is elective. So it's like, if you for whatever reason don't want to support the app, you don't have to. You could use it without supporting it by not clicking on the links, or you don't have to subscribe. But all that information is still there. It's just not curated into categories.
Right.
I don't buy comics. I don't sell comics. That was something that was decided on when monetizing the app. It's like, okay, I can't, you know, from an ethical standpoint, be a comic book buyer seller, and I really wasn't anyway. Like, the most irritating and like arduous task is, mailing something. In my opinion, it's just something that I'm very much against.
Hmm.
Not for any religious reason or anything like that. Just naturally, I gravitate away from that and like laundry. But it's just, but also having something that does deal with price, having something that does deal with talking about books that are trending or have gotten hot or whatever, just so there's no misconception ever
Right.
of what the purpose of why this is on a list or why
Right.
this is being discussed.
Yeah, and I know you put the footnotes in there oftentimes to kind of give context to
Why?
why
Yeah,
books get
yeah.
hot. But let me give like an example. Like what how would you sort of frame, like, let's say there's a YouTuber out there named Swaggle Haas Comics, and he makes a video one day and says, such and such book is a great spec book. And then, you know, 10,000 people watch this video, and, there's 100 sales on eBay. So now all of a sudden, some influencer, not me, creates this wave of purchases, and, there's a 2,000 increase in it, and now you're kind of doing your trending 20 list. Like, how
Yeah.
would you navigate that? Like, what does
We
that
just say
mean?
what it is. I mean,
Right.
that's exactly what it is. And I think there's even something maybe on the list right now, or maybe last week, where it was like Jim Comics, something about that likable, friendly Canadian YouTube personality when he talks about books, and books that make sense. And that's the thing. It's like, a lot of times when a book gets hot, it's because it makes sense. I mean, I don't like this whole sort of social media diatribe where they're like, "Oh, these people are sheep," or "all these people have FOMO." It's like really insulting to people who are collectors, who are interested in something, who discovered something new, who are excited about something, and then they're getting slammed because they bought it, and people are like, "Why are they doing?" We don't know who is buying what. It's like Moon Knight #2, uh, Arthur Harrow. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a certain excitement around MCU stuff, and then that makes a book go up in value. Somebody on YouTube mentioned something like a Star Wars book that uh, an overlooked character, and it gets hot. Well, how do we navigate that? Is just, this is up, 130% because Swaggle House mentioned it on his YouTube channel. So,
Yeah.
giving a very clear and transparent reason why these things are happening is important, because the last thing that we want to do is have somebody like using this resource and going and still being confounded why the market is operating this way or that way. I mean, that's the whole part. The whole concept is for people to um, feel more educated about what they're looking for, what they're buying, what they have. So having as much detail without it being like overwhelming, because that's the other aspect that is a challenge, is these are the goals.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think report, even if it comes from a YouTuber talking about a book, that
That's, dude,
is
that's just
that is
part of the
still market,
Yeah.
yeah, movement.
I mean, that's part of really any collectible, or even outside of collectibles. I mean, YouTube is a huge platform. I mean, everybody's engaging with it for the most part. I mean, not
Yeah,
everybody, but it's just a natural thing, bringing something to somebody's attention that they look. A lot of people are working full-time jobs, or they have other hobbies, or they have kids, or they have families, and sometimes they want to check in with Swaggle House or Comic Tom or Jim Comics or whoever, and they get information. Oh, hey, I didn't know that. You know what? That's something that interests me. Like
right, right,
Manifest Destiny 2099. I remember hearing about that years before a Key Collector, and it was like the first appearance of a 2099 Moon Knight that's a female who operates on the moon. It's like, I must have this book. And that it's just like, yeah, I'll pay. I mean, I remember when Wolverine Origin came out, and I was like, I must have this book. It's finally explaining his origin in like detail. I need to have this, and I paid, I don't know, $50 for it back then at Wizard World, which was like a hell of a lot of money, and I didn't regret it.
yeah,
When a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen came out, like when I heard the concept of it from the trailer, I was like, I need to have these comic books just because I thought it was so cool, and I paid for more. Like, it's just something that happens without the
right,
intention of wanting to resell it, just with the intention of like, okay, I want this
right.
and I want it now. That's
Once you were aware of it, you just wanted it, and
hmm
whatever that market price was, it didn't matter because you were just, oh, cool, like you found out about this and now you
yeah,
wanted it.
yeah. And it was like not worth much later, but it's not like I was like, ah, damn it, because I didn't have an intention of selling it. And I think
Right,
that's also something about the market that a lot of people who are in it for the resale aspect of it, which by the way, I do not, um, criticize any way you wish to engage with comic books, whether it's reading, buying and reselling, collecting. It's like you're doing what you enjoy. But people who, you know, buy it to resell it might be disappointed that something goes down in value. But sometimes in the moment when something is exciting, it's like, oh, awesome. It's like a ritual of like, okay, this sparked my interest. I want it. I'm going to pursue it. I'm going to receive it, and that is a complete circle now.
right. You're providing information on a thing, or the market provides information on a thing, and what you choose to do with that info is, ultimately up to you, right? Like, but I guess I want to also ask this because as we were talking about influencers and things like that on the app, and I know you've done some different partnerships, and we've had some working stuff together. Like, how do you kind of balance that aspect to the app with like doing you know different partnerships and things, but then also like trying to create new sources and stuff? Because like maybe people feel like Swaggle Haas like shouldn't Swaggle Haas talking about a book that moves in the market shouldn't be highlighted in a way, or whatever the case is. Like, how do you balance that aspect?
I mean, it's like, look, if I feel that somebody is um, talking about a book or is going to present books that are to their benefit and their benefit alone, I then it's not something that's going to go on the app.
Right.
Um, I've had people, I mean, daily, I have people reach out, sending me emails like, "Hey, man, this should be on the app. Hey, this is hot. Hey, this went up in value. This is worth this much." And it's like, what do you think? I'm not gonna like look into this? You think
Right.
it's so? It's something that is everything is researched, by myself or somebody who I trust, and or if they're doing a feature like you were kind of explaining, you know, does it make sense? Like what they're talking about. If they send me a list of something, and on it I'm like, what the hell? Like why would you put this on? Then it's not something that's going to appear on the app, and
Right.
it's also going to create doubt within me where I'm like, maybe this person is, not right to provide content. But I would love to have more voices and more people providing content, reaching out with concepts like, hey, I would love to do this for a category. I'd be like, hell yeah, what can we promote for you? Like that is the, I mean, there's definitely supposed to be, or I want there to be a bigger community input to this, but not to a point where it's like spinning out of control, because you
Right.
see that happen. You
Right.
see that happen with certain resources where it's like a lot of input, a lot of people are just able to enter anything, and then all of a sudden you have like a ton of stuff that is not necessarily relevant to most collectors, and that's kind of the point. Yeah, I understand that a full run of the elementals might be something that is very important to a certain collector, but there are resources that allow that type of interface. It's just not this one.
It definitely feels like there's still some curation on your end of making sure that the value or the info that is coming out there, even if it is from a partnership or an influencer or whatever, is news or information that is going to be providing value to that collector that they would want to just know, or they would want to be aware of these things, whether
Yeah,
it's
or even it's like you can't say that, like this right here doesn't it does like that. I can't verify that, so it
right,
won't.
right,
It's something that won't appear,
right,
or very rarely has anybody. And I think people know that, because I haven't had a whole lot of people like reach out and say, "Hey, look, I want to do a category," and then I get the category and I'm like, "This is all like makes no sense." Like I think they already know that there's a level of quality that we can't accept this or that. I mean, I've had people reach out quite a bit, and I'm saying on an individual issue by issue basis. I'm not saying presenting a concept, but
right.
I know that there's been guys that have gotten mad at me or Key Collector, the app, because they suggest something where I say, hey, you know what, this isn't something that is right for the app, and then like 3 days later, I see them on a social media site where they're like, Key Collector sucks. They're trying to rip people off. It's market manipulation, and it's like, I know who this is. This is
Right.
the guy that is like, hey, this is actually the second appearance of a nihilist, and it's like, no, it's not. But anyway,
Right.
that's just stuff that happens. But I do encourage people to reach out with concepts. I mean, I would love to have more researchers. I mean, I am, my dream would be to hire on a couple real deep dive comic researchers in like salaried positions. The problem is it's difficult to find people who understand the concept, because as sort of broad as maybe I made it sound, or as there's a real nuance to this that's difficult to explain. There's a real nuance, and that's why there's a lot of popularity surrounding the app and the
Yeah.
website, because there's a nuance to, is this a key issue, and there's almost like a feel for it, because we know there's not a definition for a
Yeah.
key issue that is industry wide. There's
Well,
not a definition for a cameo or a first full appearance, but we have a framework, and that's what we try and follow as
yeah.
closely as possible. Sorry, I
And
know you're
and I
jumping
think
on.
no, no, and I think it's fair to say, right? It's everything is always evolving. It's all kind of a moving target. We're entering a new place, right? Where we have the MCU and all of this stuff and these characters that didn't matter before, like the character Bill
Yeah,
Murray is playing, all of a sudden matter, and now you got to add
yeah,
him in and all these things. And so it's constantly moving. And also too, like it's not like, I mean, we had Wizard magazine and Overstreet and things like that, but like there is a lot of stuff I think out there in the comic book space that was not known before, or people thought it was this, but maybe it's actually this that's the first appearance and things like that, and that information continues to surface. And I feel like maybe Key Collector app has become kind of this like defining of, what these key books are, but it's all a process, right? Is that fair to say? Like it's all still being defined. And I guess maybe I can give an example. Let's talk about how maybe Key Collector labels, where if we think about characters like Punisher and Gambit and Archangel, right? Like
Sure.
situations like that, where at one point the market felt like, say, X-Men 266 is the first appearance of Gambit, and then all of a sudden the annual issue kind of emerges, and now it's like, oh, but look at this, and or the
Yeah.
Punisher book, 129 and or 130, I believe it is, or whatever the cameo appearance of Punisher is, and
134
yeah,
is
there you go.
okay, I can explain
So
this.
how do you like figure out how Key Collector wants to label these own labels, and where do you find yourself, in dealing with this stuff in comparison to, say, how CGC labels things or how Overstreet labels things?
Sure. So it's not that these things necessarily surface, although it could seem that way, because there's a lot of people who do have this knowledge, but it's not as well circulated, this information, like
Right.
Gambit, and it's all about the factual aspect of it. And that's really what all this boils down to is, okay, X-Men annual. All right, did it come out first? Okay, well we could conclude that it came out first because there is information out there that shows the on sale date, whether that's in Comic Reader or Marvel Age or whatever it might be that has solicitation dates. So okay, it came out first. Is it a cameo? At some point it's kind of hard to deny when there's a character that shows up in 10 panels and people are calling it a cameo when he's having a conversation with Storm, and we find out he's a thief, and we find out that his name, he's Gambit, and and he's in 3 different scenes in this book, and it could be overlooked because if you look at the, maybe the newsprint version of it, it's a little more difficult to see him in some of the pages because it's a dark scene, or you know, just because the 266 sells for $250, and so that must be the first appearance. Which, look, nobody's saying that a cameo appearance. There's people that'll say like, "Oh, that this is his first full appearance." Not that. And it's like, nobody's saying that a cameo is not a first appearance. It's still a first appearance. It's just by definition cameo brief. Okay, that's the way that we have interpreted the definition of cameo. So is it a brief appearance? And a lot of times we'll just, I mean, not a lot of times, but when possible, we're using Hulk 180, Hulk 181 as sort of the watermark, because it's really hard to get away from 181 being anything but the full appearance and 180 being a cameo. I mean, instead of arguing that, it's like, okay, this is something that the market seems to really have agreed upon with their dollars, and that's fine.
Right.
Doesn't mean that 180 isn't important. Doesn't mean that it's not his first appearance. It's just a first appearance briefly. So taking that as sort of the, okay, this is a teaser. Wolverine is in this issue on the last page. It's a teaser. And that is sort of the framework that we use to decide what is a cameo versus a full appearance. Okay, is it a teaser? Is it just like kind of giving a hint? Is it a brief appearance? And it's still a gray area because not everything fits into that bucket so nicely. And sometimes you have to sort of take the next step with it. Okay, it's on the fence. So how else are we going to determine if this is a cameo or a full? Is there a focus on the character? Is the character speaking? Is it named? And it's not always that clear cut, but
Yeah.
there's always a logic behind it. And if there is a major disagreement in the community versus the cameo and the full, we'll put it in a category called debatable firsts, and we'll say, okay, here is the argument, just so everybody is aware that that there is a segment or an overwhelming population of collectors who believe that this is a full appearance or this is a cameo, and here are the pictures to back it up, and that we have to make a decision at
Right.
some point.
Right. And you're trying to keep it as consistent to the terms that you've kind of felt from the community and obviously using your own sort of team's judgment
Just
on things.
trying to be as logical about it as possible. Like for example, this Vernestra Rowe recently in Star Wars was one that had gotten a lot of, oh, this is really, this is her, this is a cameo, this is a full, and it's like, okay, these three issues that we are calling a cameo are not that much different from one another in the appearance of this character that can allow us to comfortably say this is a full appearance, this is a cameo appearance. But in this issue that we're calling it the first full, there is a distinct difference in how the story focuses on this character. She's this is the first time that she is given the total perspective zoned in on her for only a few panels, but it's different than the issues that preceded it, where she was just like a background character pretty much. Even
Right.
though they said her name, even though she said something, they are all too brief, and she's not a center focus at all. So that's why this is full, because we can't call this one a full because it's not that much. It doesn't have that much more weight than the one before it that everybody agrees is a cameo.
Right.
But again, it's not a defined thing. If somebody reaches out to me and says, "Hey, this is this is definitely the full appearance," and I'm like, "You're not wrong. That's your interpretation of a full appearance." But we have to make a decision that is at least as consistent as could possibly be with the logic that we are making publicly apparent in our frequently asked questions.
Right. And is it fair to say that if new information came out that said, actually, this is the first appearance, then you would change everything that
Well, I mean, if it
you
was a logical, like let's say it was an issue that we missed,
yeah, sure. Like let's just say that nobody knew, right? And new
absolutely,
information came. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like the most important thing about the actual database, I mean, there's a lot of different most important things, like ethically what we're doing as far as monetization. As far as the database goes,
Right.
accuracy is the most important thing about the information that we provide.
Right.
But there's always, not always, but there's a lot of times there's going to be debates around cameo in full because it's just not a, there's no concrete definition. So,
Yeah.
for example, Strange Academy, this character Howie, this werewolf character, I've been getting some emails where people are saying his first full appearance is in Death of Doctor Strange, or Strange Academy presents Death of Doctor Strange, and it's like, looked at it before this was entered, and looking at these panels, it's like he is in one panel, he speaks in three other panels where he is the avatar of a video game, but that's when the wording cameo appearance, first brief appearance versus first full, the definition in its most logical and literal sense, like, is this a brief appearance? Well, yeah, it's a brief appearance. He appears in one panel despite his avatar in a video game speaking. He's briefly shown in one panel. So it's really difficult to call it a full. And then I think that we would get bombarded with even more emails, 10 times more emails had we called that a cameo appearance, because to me, it doesn't seem like that. And to a panel of people that are, hey, what do you think? Is this first? Is this a cameo or full? Like, let's talk this out. No decisions are made arbitrarily.
Right. So it's a constant conversation, and I think it's interesting because I feel like you guys are often put in this position where kind of what you say, the market tends to have to follow, and maybe people kind of, again, going back to the original point where we were talking about like key collector can mean different things to different people, and if they feel like you need to be the person who defines these terms versus like other people who are it's like, no, you shouldn't be defining any terms. It depends on what side of the aisle they want you to be,
Well,
and that can create some conflict.
yeah, and again, we launched in 2017, and I don't think that had there been definitive, hey, key collector, they're manipulating this, they're manipulating that. It's like we're a trusted resource for good reason. I
Yeah.
mean, that's where if something does uh, become etched in stone that this is a first full appearance versus this cameo, it's because people trust the logic and the framework that is set up, that is apparent, and that is often explained if there is a debate. I mean, that's one of the things that's important to me is, hey, are we making sure that people know why this is considered this over that, or why, like, I mean, you said it, Archangel. I mean, that is like a mind blower for people who have felt that his first appearance in, what is it, 26 or 24?
24,
Yeah,
24, and
24.
23.
Right. It's a mind blower for people to look at that and go, "Oh, first cover appearance? What?" Like,
Right.
no, absolutely not. And that what is my first reaction as well. But you go and you look at the pages and you're like, "Oh, it's hard to deny."
Yeah.
You can't deny it, then you can't augment the wording to make it fit your preference, because that's just like, there shouldn't be that emotional decision making occurring in a resource that is meant to be helpful to a community of collectors. So taking that out of it, and even his first full isn't necessarily the first full appearance of Archangel, because he doesn't even get that name until like
Sure. Yeah.
3 or 4 years later. So it's getting down to those specifics too that also make this an incredibly interesting hobby in its historical preciseness without
Yeah.
going overboard.
Yeah, and it brings up a good question, and that's kind of what's cool about having all the labels, because it's not always black and white, right? It's not always that this character makes this very clean first appearance, and there's little different qualifiers and stuff every time.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
also too, like it also to me, this is a little sidebar, but like even with like the Archangel thing, just because that becomes his second appearance doesn't mean that that's not going to be the book that everyone wants to own.
And
Like
it's not.
it's just being clear with the distinctions that I think what I hear from you is that's what you're trying to go for.
Exactly. It's just,
Right.
I mean, everybody wants to feel like they're more knowledgeable about what it is they're collecting. And by the way, my cat has overtaken half or maybe even 2/3 of my seat here, so that's why I'm like now like in your face. But yeah, just knowledgeable, okay?
Right.
And I think that it's even more interesting when you see stuff like that. Like the first Killer Croc, it's like you don't even see him until a few issues later, and it's like, how could you call this a full appearance? It's just sometimes some resources, especially something like Overstreet that goes into print, it's like you have a whole year, and that's how the whole Wolverine thing happened, by the way. The whole cameo versus full Wolverine back in, I think, 1980, when they labeled 181. I mean, for the first couple years that the first few years that the character was around, they didn't put it in Overstreet. They didn't have like the little first appearance of Wolverine. But when they did, it was like, I believe it was 181 that they put it on, and they disregarded 180, and then they went back and they changed it again, like in the 1981 and 1982 Overstreet, and then they
Right.
changed it again in like the 82 and 83 one. Actually, all the pictures are in the Hulk 180. If you tap on the cover on the app and you swipe, you could see all the different Overstreet designations of how they describe the issue. And it's like, this is where that debate actually started. Like you
Mm.
could see
Yeah.
why there's confusion. And we try to at least give people as much information as possible on these things, because we're talking about something that's been around for almost a century, comic book publishing, and it's very difficult to delve into everything individually. And so giving that summation is, it's a fun part of this resource.
I did want to ask a little bit about the Hot 10 list
Yeah.
and just kind of how you get to that list. I know in the little footnote it says that you're looking for books that have increased the most in value and maybe have three different data points of grade levels, and
Yeah.
that's kind of what happens there. But am I right that there's a little bit of curation in that list, and that maybe the curation comes from a place of like giving context as to why a book gets hot? So, for instance, if Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is coming, 169 is a little more featured because, oh, I can connect the dots as to why we're talking about this book.
It's 3 points of data. That's
Mm-hmm.
sort of the qualifier. Like, okay, did you qualify to get into the candidates this week? And then looking at the percentages, if it was sold for $500 last time and a 6.0 and $1,000 this week, and it went up 100%. Okay, so then those 3 percentage points are added together. So if it's like went up 100% in this grade, it went up 10% in this grade, it went up in 30% this grade, then okay, that's 140. I think whatever I said, but
Yeah, that was right.
oh, excellent. So then it's 140. That's the points. That's its ranking system. The rank that it got, and
Right.
then adding up the other um, percentage points, and then where do they rank based on the percentage. But of course, there's other aspects that come into play, like did this book not sell since 2020? Now it's up like 1,000%. Like,
Right.
then
Yeah.
that would automatically like edge it out into first place, and even if it's not really the hottest book. So
Right.
there's a limit
Like
that
there'd
if
be
it
golden age books that probably do this a lot.
right, and there's a
Yeah.
limit of how many points it can go up to. Like, it can't go above 100 points in order to, when we're putting this together in terms of ranking it. And then is there there's a frequency too, like how many copies have sold this week, and are they averaging higher over the long term, over the 90-day period, or over the 1 year period? Is it averaging higher than it has in past sales? And that has its own weight and ranking to it too. So, I mean, it's like you were saying earlier, evolving. There's a evolution of how the Hot 10 definitely has been assembled, and uh, again, it's pretty transparent. Like, you
Yeah.
can go in and you could look and see, okay, I see these sales have happened, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's all resources that anybody can look into.
I mean, it's a great list, and I'm glad that you do that work
It's a pain in the
because
ass, man.
I
It
reap the
really
benefits from
is.
it every week. Um, Last little thing I just wanted to touch upon before I let you go here. We were talking about, when Key Collector sort of breaks news, or oh, we hear this thing is optioned and things like that, or you get stuff from different sources. I'm assuming that maybe you're getting a lot of different info, different media outlets. Like, how do you filter what you feel like is sort of a kind of a credible rumor or like a credible news leak? Or are you just always sort of like following, well, the books are moving, where did those books move from? Oh, these news sources, therefore I'm going to talk about it. Like, how do you kind of filter that?
I mean, there's very few news sources that you know I would consider credible. So,
Sure.
if that were the case, there would be, the speculation list would have like 7 or 8 books on it daily,
Right.
but
Right.
usually it's one every couple days. There's something that comes up that's like, okay, that's from a source that we trust, and it's a reasonable rumor that's getting traction. And that's another thing. Like, for example, the World War Hulk rumor that came out, and while it might be in title, like the title might be something that comes to the MCU, like the story in and of itself, because of what preceded it, had already happened in the MCU, like the whole Planet Hulk Gladiator thing that
Right.
led into World War Hulk. it just doesn't, unless they figure out a way to go back, and they can do anything, right? But there are some rumors that just don't necessarily um, feel right, even if they do come from a credible source. I've had rumors come, and it happens, but it's like I can't necessarily put this out there because um, it doesn't feel like it's a very likely scenario. So
Mm,
there's times when it's just vetoed. It's like, okay, this isn't going to be presented because it just doesn't seem likely. Or there are times when, like that World War Hulk, when the book starts moving because this rumor is starting to really get traction, and it's like, okay, well, now we have to put it out there so people know what's going on. But here's the caveat: this is
right.
why we feel that it might not be something to really put that much faith into, because it just doesn't seem likely. But it could be likely because they might just use the title and the title alone. So that's a possibility.
Right.
But there's definitely a thought process of logic and reasonability, and what is this source? Is it something that is, if it's not a source that we prefer, then it's okay, is this going to get traction? Monitoring the market and seeing if it starts to pick up, and then okay, it's picked up, it looks like it's getting hot, now we have to explain why it's getting hot, and hopefully dissuade. Like, there's a lot of times that you could tell from our descriptions that we are not getting behind something, or we're
Right.
dissuading people from, because we know there are newer collectors that come in that might read something, if there's no context as to why, who could just go and buy a book because they think they're getting an early in on something. And it's like, look, here is why it's getting hot, but here is sort of our opinion on why this might not be something that you should take that seriously right now until more information comes out. I mean, that
Right.
try to make that as evident as possible, and I think that we do a really good job of that.
Yeah. And I've noticed, I feel like, is that something that has sort of evolved over time of just trying to figure out? Because I do notice like more footnotes and caveats from time to time
Um,
with new things.
I don't know. I feel like we've, at least for a really long time, it's something that we've done. I mean,
Okay.
because that's just part of the package, part of the heart and soul of the resource is providing information, and without those footnotes or without an explanation of why this is happening, then we're kind of failing in that
Right.
directive. But there are times when something gets hot, and you just see it on eBay. You're going through eBay and you're like, wow, this popped. Why? And obviously we know, okay, somebody's talking about this, but we don't know who. And that's something that's kind of funny that happens a lot, that, we'll get an email or a message on Instagram from somebody, hey, so and so talked about this and you didn't give them credit. It's like, we're not, you know, we're not watching every YouTube spec show and every Instagram account and every Facebook page, and it, like, I would love to have that sort of ability to collect all that information so that we could say, okay, if this is moving 30% above where it was last week, which, by the way, that wouldn't even make the list, but if it was, and if that was part of the list, then we could cite, like, we don't have any affiliations or enemies where we're like, we're not going to mention whoever, we're not going to mention pressable defects, we're not going to mention CBSI, we're not going to mention um, I'm trying to think of who, like, there's no, this is a business, we're running a
Swaggle You don't mention Swaggle ever.
swaggle who, come on, I've never
Yeah.
heard of that. But no, there's, everybody is welcome to participate, and I wish that there was more voices on Key Collector,
Sure.
and I encourage that. So, but sometimes if there's information that isn't up to snuff, or isn't something that is relevant or interesting to the audience, and they say we can't really do this, it's nothing against anybody. It's just the nature of understanding the market. And we have a very strong understanding of the market because we are in it 7 days a week. I'm a 20 hours a day. I mean, in one way or another, I mean, there's very little downtime for the team. So there's always communication, and that's just our job. So
Yeah. It's very true. I get sad sometimes when I get that little push notification of that rumor thing that has come out before I'm able to make that purchase.
well,
I was like, why,
well,
Nick, why are you so on top of
I'm
this? Like,
sorry,
just
man. But well, I'll tell you this: there's nothing that gets sent out via push notification that's a rumor. I mean, it is
yeah,
always a verified and official source when we do a push notification because it's
sure.
very important to not interrupt. But there's, like you said, there's stuff that goes on the spec deck that might not be totally confirmed yet, but it's got a real good chance. I mean, we got a great track record, which I'm very proud of. It's not 100%, but
Mhm.
it's pretty damn good. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anybody can
Well,
ask any question, by the way. If anybody has a question, they could hit me up at Nick at Key Collector Comics. If I don't get back to you right away, it's just because we get a lot of emails. But try to reply as much as possible. And if something didn't get replied to, send me another email, and you'll get a reply.
sweet. Well, with that, I guess that's a good time for us to kind of wrap it up. Nick, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me. Maybe you can kind of leave some people with, yeah, well, you already told them where they could find you, but maybe just
Oh, words of
give us a little,
inspiration.
or you just giving it, let them know what Key Collector is, and I guess if
Oh,
if they've made it through the entire interview
oh
and they
well, if they
clicked on
did
this
that, then
video
holy.
without having downloaded Key Collector, I think now's
Oh,
the time for them to give the app a try.
yeah, yeah. Go to Apple or Google Play and Key Collector Comics and download it. If you haven't left us a review, that's really very much appreciated. And again, feedback. That's what the only way that we can make a better resource is by getting feedback from people. So please, Nick at Key Collector Comics, and we're always striving to make this a better resource for comic book collectors and make the hobby more fun. So thank you, Swaggle House, Mickey, whatever we've decided on. I
Yep.
appreciate you, reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much again, Nick, for coming on. Keep doing your thing. Appreciate the work you've been putting into it, and yeah, I hope that this conversation was enjoyable for everyone listening. So, thank you
Thank you.
guys all.
Thanks, everybody.